The studio lights blazed brighter than ever that night. Cameras glided across the stage, capturing every glimmer, every heartbeat, every ounce of tension that hung in the air. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, a televised charity discussion about transparency and global philanthropy. But beneath the calm smiles and polite applause, something electric stirred. Chelsea Clinton sat center stage, her posture flawless, her confidence rehearsed. She had done this 100 times. The daughter of political royalty, raised beneath the weight of cameras and expectations. Her team had prepared every line, every statistic, every gesture. This was supposed to be her moment to remind America that the Clinton name still meant power, purpose, and polish. Then the second guest walked in. Jasmine Crockett, sharp, composed, a force cloaked in calm. Her entrance didn't need an introduction. Her presence was one. The audience noticed immediately. The air changed, the chatter softened. The woman known for her fiery intellect and fearless confrontations had entered a stage built on legacy and image. The host, smiling nervously, welcomed both guests. The cameras zoomed in. The red recording light blinked on. "Tonight," he began, "we explore the role of truth and transparency in modern leadership." Chelsea smiled, perfectly on cue. But Jasmine simply nodded, her gaze steady, unwavering. And in that silent exchange, the entire room felt it, the unspoken tension between inherited privilege and earned respect. Producers in the control room whispered, noticing the energy shift on screen. Viewers across the nation leaned closer to their TVs. Something about this pairing didn't feel routine. The applause faded. The conversation began, and as Chelsea spoke with her usual ease, Crockett sat listening, every word, every pause, every polished sentence dissected behind her thoughtful eyes. Then, just before the commercial break, Jasmine leaned forward ever so slightly, a signal to anyone who knew her style that something was coming. The atmosphere grew heavy. Even Chelsea sensed it, though she couldn't yet see the storm forming just inches away. The live broadcast had only begun, but history had already started writing itself. The studio returned from commercial break to a burst of music and applause. The host smiled, unaware that the next few minutes would rewrite every headline in the country. The crowd's excitement felt lighthearted. They expected charm, wit, maybe a few sharp exchanges. What they didn't know was that the calm before them was about to crack. Chelsea Clinton adjusted her microphone, her polished confidence radiating through the screen. "You know," she began with a practiced laugh, "our foundation's mission has always been to empower communities, to build transparency, and to give back to the people who trust us." Her tone was graceful, her words smooth. Every sentence was wrapped in precision, crafted by PR teams and media coaches. She'd been through tougher interviews before, or so she thought. Jasmine Crockett listened quietly, her fingers interlaced, her posture deliberate. She didn't interrupt. She didn't roll her eyes. She just watched, the way a prosecutor watches a witness who's just started to dig her own grave. When Chelsea finished, the host nodded. "Remarkable work," he said politely. "Now, Representative Crockett, what are your thoughts on transparency in public institutions?" That was the spark. Crockett leaned slightly toward the microphone. Her tone was calm, respectful, but her words carried the weight of something deeper. "Transparency," she began slowly, "isn't a slogan. It's not a PR tool or a family tradition. It's a promise, one that should never disappear behind closed accounts." The crowd went silent. Chelsea's smile faltered for the first time, just slightly. Crockett continued. "And speaking of transparency, Chelsea," she said, turning her gaze directly at her co-guest, "since we're on live television, would you explain the missing $82 million from your foundation's 2021 audit?" The question hit like thunder. A murmur rippled through the audience. The host froze, glancing nervously toward the producers behind the cameras. Even the sound technician lifted his eyes from the mixer. Chelsea blinked, her face tightening. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice still trying to sound steady. Crockett didn't flinch. "The $82 million, she repeated. filed under transitional partnerships in the 2021 Clinton Foundation audit. The numbers don't reconcile with the listed beneficiaries. Would you care to clarify where that money went? Chelsea laughed softly. The kind of laugh used to buy time. Well, Congresswoman, financial audits can be complex. We work with several international partners and sometimes reports. Crockett cut in, her voice even but sharper now. I understand complex. What I don't understand is how $82 million can disappear between partnerships that don't exist on the IRS registry. A collective gasp spread through the studio. Someone in the audience whispered, "Oh my God." The host tried to interject. "Ladies, perhaps we can—" But Crockett continued unfazed. "Because I have the documents right here." She reached beneath the desk and lifted a thin blue folder, its edges marked with yellow tabs. The camera zoomed in as she placed it gently on the table. "These are copies of your foundation's filings. Every page cross-checked against public records." Chelsea's composure began to fracture. Her lips tightened. I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying," Crockett said firmly. "I'm reading." She opened the folder, flipping to a page. Page 37. The audit summary lists a community equity fund based in Manhattan. It received $8.2 million in funding. The issue is that fund doesn't exist, nor does the address attached to it. Chelsea swallowed hard, glancing toward the camera, perhaps searching for help. That's simply not true. Crockett turned another page. Page 41. Offshore transfers marked under development grants. 3 separate transactions, each routed through the same holding company registered in Delaware. Under your name. The host's voice trembled. "Representative, are these documents verified?" Crockett didn't look up. "Yes. These are the same documents filed with the IRS and obtained through the Freedom of Information Act." The words hung heavy in the air. Even the hum of the studio lights seemed louder now. Chelsea leaned back, eyes narrowing. "This is an ambush," she said finally, her tone shifting from polite to defensive. Crockett met her glare calmly. "No, Chelsea. This is accountability. And the only ambush here is the one faced by the truth every time power hides behind charity." The audience erupted, some clapping, others murmuring in disbelief. The camera caught every expression, every nervous glance, every flicker of tension. Chelsea tried to regain her footing. "Congresswoman, you're twisting numbers. You're misinterpreting data that—" Crockett leaned forward. "Then clarify it. Right now, live. The nation is watching." The host gestured for a break, but it was too late. The story had already taken life. Chelsea inhaled sharply, her fingers gripping the edge of the desk. "Our foundation has always been transparent." "Then show it," Crockett interrupted, her tone rising just slightly, her control unwavering. "Show the proof, because the public deserves to know where $82 million meant for relief programs actually went." The air felt charged, electric. Even the studio audience, who had come expecting a polite conversation, now sat on the edge of their seats. Chelsea's voice trembled for the first time. I don't have those numbers with me right now." Crockett smiled faintly, just enough to signal control. "Of course not, but I do." And with that, she slid one of the documents across the table, the paper gliding like a blade over glass. The host froze, speechless. Cameras zoomed in. The sound of the audience faded into stunned silence. Chelsea's face went pale. Crockett's eyes locked on hers, not out of malice. "But conviction? You see, Chelsea," she said, her tone now quiet, steady, unshakable. "It's easy to talk about integrity when no one's checking the receipts. But when they are, truth has a way of showing up uninvited." The last line hit like a verdict. The audience stayed silent for a full 3 seconds, then erupted in uneasy applause. The director's voice echoed in the earpieces of every crew member. "Do not cut to commercial." And in that single moment, millions of viewers across the country realized they weren't watching a talk show anymore. They were witnessing a collapse. Live, unfiltered, irreversible. The studio felt heavier now, like the air itself had thickened. The flashing red light above the camera was no longer just a signal. It was a warning. Every second was live. Every word mattered. Chelsea Clinton sat motionless, her fingers twitching slightly against the desk. The once assured poise she carried into the studio had begun to unravel under the weight of Crockett's calm precision. What had started as a conversation about transparency had become something else entirely, a public reckoning. Jasmine Crockett remained composed, the folder still open before her. Her voice didn't need to rise. It carried power through its control. "Chelsea," she began softly, "this isn't personal. It's principle. When the public trusts you with their money, with their hope, it stops being about family names. It becomes about accountability." The words landed like stone on water, quiet, but with ripples that spread wide. Chelsea inhaled deeply, her eyes darting to the host for rescue. But he was frozen, eyes locked on the teleprompter that had long since stopped scrolling. The control room whispered through his earpiece, "Let it roll." "Don't interrupt." "Congresswoman," Chelsea finally spoke, her tone careful, calculated. "You're reading from incomplete reports. These numbers have context, and I think it's irresponsible to misrepresent." Crockett raised a hand slightly. "Then give us the context." "That's what transparency is, isn't it?" The audience murmured again, half in support, half in disbelief. Chelsea's jaw tightened. "There are legal reasons, confidential donors, active investigations, legal reasons?" Crockett echoed. "Or convenient excuses?" That line struck. The studio gasped audibly. Chelsea blinked fast, visibly shaken. "I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated like I'm under oath." Crockett leaned back, just slightly, her gaze unbroken. "Maybe you should be." For a moment, it felt like even the cameras stopped breathing. The host cleared his throat, desperate to break the tension. "Ladies, maybe we can pivot." Crockett turned to him, voice firm yet polite. "This is the pivot, sir. This is the point. When truth meets accountability on live television." Then she turned back to Chelsea. "I'm not here to humiliate you, Chelsea, but I am here to remind you that transparency doesn't come with an asterisk." Chelsea's expression hardened. "And I'm here to remind you that not everyone grandstands for viral clips, Congresswoman." It was a jab, sharp, personal. But Crockett didn't flinch. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from knowing you're holding the truth. "Viral clips?" she repeated calmly. "No, Chelsea. I deal in viral facts." The audience gasped again. The host looked down, pretending to review his notes, but the damage was already done. Crockett opened another page in the folder. "You said the funds were for international outreach programs in South Asia, correct?" Chelsea hesitated. "That's correct." Crockett tapped the document with her finger. "Then explain why the listed project managers, the people supposedly running those programs, don't exist." "3 of the names are fabricated. One belongs to a woman who passed away 5 years before your report." Chelsea froze. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The air conditioning hummed quietly in the silence. "Would you like me to read their names?" Crockett asked softly. "No," Chelsea said quickly. Crockett nodded. "Didn't think so." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of fear, full of disbelief, full of the sound of legacy cracking under the pressure of truth. Chelsea finally spoke, voice trembling. "You've clearly been briefed with misleading information. These documents," Crockett interrupted gently, "are your own filings." Chelsea's face went pale. The host looked at the camera, his voice low. "We'll, continue this conversation after." But the producers in his earpiece were shouting, "No breaks! Keep rolling! Ratings are spiking!" The moment was too real to cut. Crockett placed her pen down, speaking slower now, each word deliberate. "Chelsea, do you understand what this means? If these discrepancies are confirmed, it's not just a scandal. It's a betrayal of the very people who believed in your cause." Chelsea's voice cracked slightly. "You don't know what it's like to live under constant scrutiny." Crockett's eyes softened, but her voice stayed strong. "You're right. I don't. But I do know what it's like to fight for people who never get the chance to be heard." The line hit hard. The audience, silent moments ago, now began nodding, clapping softly, sensing the moral weight behind her words. Chelsea looked down at the table. For the first time, the heir of a political dynasty looked human, vulnerable, uncertain. Crockett continued, her voice steady, like a closing argument in a courtroom. Power is not inherited, Chelsea. It's earned, and it's kept only through truth. You had the nation's trust. $82 million worth of it. And if you can't tell us where that went, then maybe this conversation is long overdue. The crowd broke into applause. Chelsea glanced toward the offstage crew, her eyes pleading for a signal to cut the feed. But the signal never came. The host, overwhelmed, leaned back and whispered into his mic, "We're still live, folks." Crockett turned to the camera now, her expression unshaken. "This isn't about politics," she said, addressing the audience directly. "It's about accountability. No name, no legacy, no foundation is above the truth." Her words echoed through the studio, strong, slow, deliberate. Chelsea sat silent, the weight of every headline she'd avoided suddenly bearing down. And just as the host prepared to close the segment, Chelsea whispered, almost to herself, "You think you've won tonight? But this isn't over." Crockett's reply was calm, not triumphant, not cruel, just final. "It doesn't have to be. As long as the truth keeps showing up, I don't need to win." The screen faded into the network's logo as the crowd erupted one last time, unsure if they'd just witnessed history or the end of an era. But one thing was certain. Jasmine Crockett had crossed a line few dared to approach, and she did it live, with the whole world watching. The lights above the stage burned hotter now, casting a sharp white glare across the table. The atmosphere had shifted from tense to electric, the kind of pressure that makes the walls feel closer. Everyone in the room sensed it. Something irreversible was about to happen. Chelsea Clinton adjusted her blazer, trying to recover her rhythm, but the cracks in her composure were showing. Her once smooth confidence had hardened into a defensive mask. She turned toward the host, searching for rescue, but he only stared down at his note cards, silently praying the teleprompter would start moving again. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't blink. Her eyes stayed locked on Chelsea, her tone calm, deliberate, and cold enough to cut through glass. "You say it's misinformation," she said, lightly tapping the blue folder with her index finger. "So let's verify it. Live. Right here." Chelsea's jaw tightened. "This isn't the place for a financial interrogation. Then where is?" Crockett interrupted, her voice smooth but firm. "Because for years you've spoken about transparency. You built a brand on it. You've stood before donors, teachers, and families, promising that every cent was accounted for. So now that we're here, let's be transparent together." The audience burst into applause. The camera zoomed in. Crockett's hand opened the folder again, the pages whispering as they turned. Each document was marked in yellow. Highlighted figures, circled signatures, red notes scribbled along the margins. It looked less like a folder and more like evidence prepared for trial. "Let's start simple," she continued. "This form here, filed January 2022, it lists a transfer of $42 million to a global youth initiative registered in Manhattan." She looked up, her eyes steady. "Except the New York Department of State has no record of that entity existing. None. Not a license, not an address, not even a tax ID." Chelsea exhaled slowly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "These organizations often operate under umbrella partnerships. They don't always appear in state filings." Crockett nodded as if she expected that. "Of course, but they should appear in federal filings, yet they don't. And when we tracked the payment trail, it led to a real estate shell company, one owned by your former finance director." The room gasped audibly. Even the camera crew exchanged glances. Chelsea's voice rose, defensive now. "You're twisting facts to create a narrative." Crockett held up a finger. "The only narrative here is numbers, Chelsea. And numbers don't twist. They tell." The studio went silent again. The host leaned forward, unsure if he should intervene. "Representative Crockett, are these documents confirmed?" "Yes," she replied, not breaking eye contact. "Every page has been verified through the IRS public record portal and cross-checked with the Department of Treasury database. What we're looking at isn't speculation. It's documentation." Chelsea swallowed, her throat visibly tight. Her hands clasped together on the table, but they were trembling. Crockett continued, her tone softening, but only slightly. Let's talk about intent. You've always spoken about empowering women, about breaking barriers, and yet, she paused, letting the silence breathe. Most of the women listed as program directors in these reports either never worked for your foundation, or, tragically, aren't even alive. Gasps again. Louder this time. Someone in the audience whispered, "She has the receipts." Chelsea turned pale. "That's absurd. It's public record," Crockett said evenly. And the most tragic part? Families of these women have confirmed they were never contacted. Their names were used, and their trust was exploited. The words hung heavy in the air like smoke. Chelsea's breathing grew shallow. "I'm not responsible for clerical errors in old reports. Those are handled by our accountants." Crockett tilted her head. "So you're saying your accountants faked names of deceased women for credibility?" Chelsea froze. The crowd erupted again, some gasping, some clapping, some too stunned to move. The host pressed his fingers to his earpiece, whispering to the control room. "Do we cut? Do we go to break?" But the producer's voice came back, tense and excited. "No, let it run. This is history." Crockett leaned forward, lowering her voice to a calm, almost compassionate tone. "Chelsea, I don't take joy in this. But when power becomes comfortable enough to exploit tragedy, to rewrite the stories of real people for profit, someone has to draw a line." Chelsea looked down, her silence louder than any defense she could have mustered. Then, Crockett did something unexpected. She lifted a single photograph from the folder and placed it gently on the desk between them. "This," she said quietly, "is Clara Jensen, a community leader from Milwaukee. Her name appears on your 2021 report as a program manager for your South Asia Outreach Initiative, but Clara died in 2017. The audience gasped again, this time no applause, no noise. Just stunned silence. Crockett's voice trembled slightly now, not with anger, but with grief. Her daughter watched this program tonight. She reached out to my office 2 days ago when she saw her mother's name listed on your website. She wanted to know why her mom was still working for the Clinton Foundation." Chelsea covered her mouth, blinking fast. For a moment, she looked less like a political figure and more like a person confronted by something she couldn't rationalize away. Crockett looked down, closing the folder slowly. "This isn't politics anymore. This is humanity. And if $82 million can vanish while the names of the dead are borrowed to justify it, then maybe the legacy isn't what we thought it was." The host sat speechless. The crowd rose slowly to its feet, not clapping, just standing in disbelief. Crockett turned to the camera, her tone steady, her gaze piercing. "For every person who's ever been told their voice doesn't matter, remember this moment. Truth doesn't need permission to speak." The camera panned in close, catching every emotion on Chelsea's face: shock, guilt, confusion, and the dawning realization that the story she'd controlled for years had finally escaped her grasp. The network cut to black. Too late to stop the truth, but just in time to let the world breathe again. And in living rooms across America, people sat frozen, their hearts pounding, realizing they had just witnessed the fall of a legacy. Live, unedited, unforgettable. The broadcast ended, but the silence that followed felt louder than any applause. Millions of viewers sat frozen, watching their screens fade to black, their minds still echoing with Jasmine Crockett's final words. Truth doesn't need permission to speak. For a few seconds, the world seemed suspended, and then it erupted. Clips of the exchange flooded social media within minutes. Hashtags exploded across every platform. Or Crockett exposes Clinton, or 82 million mystery, or legacy falls. Major outlets scrambled to verify the documents shown on live TV. Cable news anchors spoke in hushed tones, almost afraid of what they were covering. By sunrise, the story had gone global. British tabloids, European morning shows, even political podcasts in Australia. Everyone was replaying the moment Chelsea's silence turned into history. Inside a sleek Manhattan penthouse, Chelsea Clinton sat alone at her dining table, staring at her phone. Missed calls lined the screen. Campaign advisors, lawyers, foundation board members, all begging for answers she didn't have. The once polished image of political royalty now looked fragile, human, and cornered. Meanwhile, in her Washington, D.C. office, Jasmine Crockett watched the replay too, but her expression wasn't triumphant. She didn't smile or gloat. She just sat there, listening to her own words echo through the speakers, the weight of them settling heavier with each replay. Her aide, Marcus, stepped in quietly. The network's requesting a follow-up interview. CNN, BBC, even The View. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze remained fixed on the frozen image of Chelsea, a woman undone by her own empire. "It's not about me," Jasmine finally said. "It's about what's been happening in plain sight." Marcus nodded. "Still, people are calling you a hero." Crockett shook her head. "Heroes don't enjoy this part. They just do what's right." Across the country, ordinary Americans were talking. Teachers, veterans, parents, people who had once donated to foundations believing in change. They began asking questions, not out of anger, but heartbreak. In a small town in Wisconsin, Clara Jensen's daughter, Lydia, sat in her living room, the same photograph Crockett had shown on TV framed on the mantel. Tears glistened in her eyes as reporters camped outside her door. She believed in them. Lydia said softly in an interview, "Mom used to tell me the Clintons would help build a better world. Now, her name's just paperwork to them." The clip of her voice played on every major network that evening, amplifying what Jasmine had said on that stage, that this was no longer about politics, it was about humanity. Meanwhile, the Clinton Foundation's PR team scrambled to contain the fallout. Statements were drafted, retracted, and redrafted again. The official line was, "administrative inconsistencies," a phrase that only fueled the outrage further. Investigative journalists began pulling at the threads Crockett had laid bare. They found more irregularities, undisclosed accounts, mismatched reports, unverified partnerships. Each revelation hit like an aftershock, shaking the Foundation's credibility to its core. The White House press room buzzed with questions. Was the Department of Justice aware? Would there be an inquiry? And most hauntingly, Haitor, how long had this been going on? Back in Dallas, Crockett's phone wouldn't stop ringing. She ignored most of the calls, choosing instead to sit by her office window, watching the city lights flicker in the night. Her thoughts drifted to Clara, to Lydia, and to every person whose trust had been betrayed by wealth dressed as virtue. The political theater was over, but the real cost was just beginning to show. She whispered to herself, almost like a promise, if truth can shake power, maybe it can heal too. That night, a new kind of silence filled the country. Not the silence of shock, but of reflection. Talk shows debated whether Jasmine had gone too far, while others called it the bravest live moment in modern journalism. And through it all, Crockett stayed quiet. She didn't post a statement, didn't tweet a victory. Her silence spoke louder than any headline. In Manhattan, Chelsea finally broke hers. She appeared on a late-night news segment, pale and guarded. "There are always complexities behind numbers," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I've never profited from the suffering of others." It was a defensive attempt, but viewers saw through it. The interviewer asked directly, "Then why were deceased names used?" Chelsea blinked rapidly. "I wasn't aware. That was a clerical oversight." The nation sighed collectively. For the first time, legacy and accountability had collided in full view. By morning, Crockett's face appeared on every major newspaper, half in praise, half in warning. The woman who shook the dynasty. Jasmine versus the machine. Yet she walked into Congress the next day as calmly as ever, dressed in a navy suit, folder in hand, eyes forward. No security detail, no entourage, just purpose. As she passed through the Capitol halls, aides and reporters whispered, some nodding respectfully, others glaring. But Crockett didn't react. She wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing truth. And truth, she knew, had already started rewriting history. A voice called from behind, a fellow representative. "You realize you've just opened a war?" Crockett glanced back, her expression unreadable. Then let it begin with honesty. The day ended with her sitting alone in her office again. Outside, the world was changing, conversations shifting, people awakening, and on her desk, next to her phone, lay a single note from Lydia Jensen. Handwritten, simple. It read, "For speaking up when no one else would. Thank you for giving my mother her name back." Jasmine held the note for a long moment, then closed her eyes. There were still battles ahead, political storms, investigations, media spin. But for that single quiet second, she allowed herself to breathe. Because for the first time in a long time, truth had won, not with noise, not with power, but with courage. Washington, D.C. had seen scandals before, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a controversy. It was a rupture. A dynasty had been shaken on live television, and the aftershocks were now tearing through the country's political walls. The morning after Crockett's confrontation, the U.S. Capitol buzzed with chaos. Reporters lined the marble steps, cameras flashing, microphones waving, all chasing one name, Jasmine Crockett. She walked through the crowd without flinching, her expression unreadable, her stride steady. Every question thrown her way bounced off her composure like rain on steel. "Congresswoman, do you regret the exposure? Are you planning to testify before the Ethics Committee?" Was this a political attack? She didn't break stride. She simply replied, "It was an act of accountability, and accountability doesn't play favorites." Across the city, the Clinton Foundation headquarters was under lockdown. Windows dark, blinds drawn, no statements beyond a sterile press release. "We take these allegations seriously and are reviewing internal practices." But behind those walls, panic reigned. Board members demanded explanations. Donors began withdrawing support. Major corporate partners suspended ties, citing ethical uncertainty. By the second day, 3 federal agencies had quietly opened preliminary reviews. The Treasury Department, the IRS, and the Office of the Inspector General all confirmed that the financial inconsistencies highlighted by Crockett were now under formal examination. Cable news anchors called it the reckoning. Meanwhile, within the Democratic Party, fault lines were forming. Some leaders rallied around Crockett, calling her courage a necessary mirror for accountability. Others whispered that she had gone rogue, accusing her of damaging the party's image for personal glory. But Crockett ignored the noise. She wasn't chasing politics. She was chasing the truth. Inside the Capitol, she sat in a closed-door session with the Oversight Committee. Dozens of eyes fixed on her as she placed the blue folder, the same one from that fateful night, onto the table. The room fell silent. "I didn't go looking for this," she began, her tone firm but calm. "This came to my desk through whistleblowers who were afraid of power, afraid of exposure, afraid of ending up forgotten. I gave them my word I'd bring this to light. And I did," the chairman leaned forward. "Are you aware of the magnitude of what you've done, Representative Crockett? You've accused one of the most influential political families in modern history of financial misconduct." Crockett met his gaze. "I didn't accuse anyone. The documents did." The room stirred, whispers spreading like ripples across water. Outside the committee chamber, media vans crowded Constitution Avenue. Every minute brought new speculation, indictments, subpoenas, internal leaks. The world was watching the system test its own integrity. And in New York, Chelsea Clinton's crisis only deepened. Her former finance director, Arthur DeWitt, had gone silent. Then a leak. A confidential memo surfaced online, showing correspondence between DeWitt and Foundation executives, discussing the temporary redirection of $28 million for private consulting operations. The memo was dated just weeks before Crockett's revelation. The press tore it apart. Headlines screamed across the internet. Internal leak confirms $28 million transfer. Chelsea's team discussed shell accounts. Jasmine Crockett was right. Chelsea's inner circle began to fracture. Advisors resigned. Legal teams quit. Longtime donors distanced themselves publicly. And behind closed doors, her family urged her to step away from the foundation. Permanently. Meanwhile, Congress prepared for hearings. Invitations were sent to both Crockett and Clinton to testify. The nation braced for a showdown that promised to redefine political accountability in America. On the evening before the hearing, Crockett sat alone in her apartment. The city lights shimmered against the window pane, painting faint reflections across her face. She looked tired, not defeated, but deeply aware of what was coming. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Lydia Jensen, the daughter of the woman whose name had been misused. No matter how ugly it gets, keep going. You're speaking for all of us. Crockett smiled faintly. That single message meant more than all the applause or headlines. The next morning, the world stopped to watch. C-SPAN cameras filled the hearing room. Every seat was taken, every reporter poised. Chelsea entered first, dressed in gray, her eyes downcast, her confidence fractured but not gone. Moments later, Jasmine Crockett walked in, composed, dignified, and unflinching. When she sat down, the chairman called the session to order. We are here today to examine serious allegations concerning financial mismanagement and the misuse of charitable funds. Chelsea shifted, uncomfortably. Crockett placed her folder on the table again, this time thicker, fuller, with new evidence added by federal investigators. Representative Crockett, the chairman began, please summarize the material you've submitted. Jasmine's voice carried across the chamber, calm, direct, unshakable. These records confirm a systemic pattern of funds being redirected into personal ventures under the guise of philanthropy. And while accountability should never be partisan, justice must never be optional. Gasps echoed through the room. Chelsea's attorney objected. These claims are speculative and politically motivated. Crockett turned her head slightly. Facts aren't political. They're just uncomfortable for those who built comfort on illusion. The audience stirred again, whispers rising, cameras flashing. As the testimony continued, it became clear that this was no longer about one person. It was about an entire culture of untouchable privilege. By the end of the session, committee members looked shaken. One congressman, a senior Democrat, whispered under his breath, "She's changed everything." Outside, crowds gathered, chanting Crockett's name. Protesters held signs reading, "No more untouchables," and "Truth over legacy." For the first time in decades, America wasn't arguing over left or right. It was arguing over right and wrong. That night, as the sun set over the Capitol dome, Jasmine Crockett stepped out into the cool air. Reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs erupted. But she didn't speak. She simply looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "This is bigger than any of us now." And somewhere deep inside the walls of power, a quiet truth began to echo. That when courage meets corruption, even the strongest dynasties can fall. The storm had passed, but the echoes still lingered. Across America, television screens replayed the same moment. Jasmine Crockett closing that blue folder in front of the committee, her words calm yet final. Justice must never be optional. It was the sound of history turning a page. Within days, the financial investigation expanded nationwide. Federal auditors released a 200-page report confirming Crockett's evidence. $82 million in misallocated funds, reclassified, redirected, and disguised under corporate partnerships that never existed. The headlines were merciless. Clinton Foundation faces criminal probe. Chelsea's legacy under investigation. Crockett's evidence proven authentic. The political elite fell silent. The dynasty that had once seemed untouchable was now under the microscope of public truth. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett refused every interview, every award, every spotlight. She knew her work wasn't about fame, it was about restoration.